السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الدين عند الله الإسلام. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: بني الإسلام على 5. صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. We praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the numerous blessings that He has given us. We praise and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our health and wealth. We praise and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our friends and family. We praise and we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the single greatest blessing that He has bestowed upon all of us over here, which is our Iman and Islam. Many times when we go to interfaith gatherings, the different leaders or organizers, they'll sit in groups and they'll have Q&As. They'll talk about how similar we are and how there are not that much differences between us. And unfortunately, sometimes you have Muslims who go and speak at such events, and they'll make comments when they're asked the question, what is Islam? That Islam is peace. And then the Christian is asked the same question, oh, Christianity is also peace. And then they ask the rabbi, what's Judaism? Oh, it's all peace. Oh, well, that's great. We're pretty much all the same then. There's not really much difference. Let's just hold hands and just pray together, huh? That's how it seems like. We're all the same. And the Muslims are like, yeah. I'm like, no. That's not how it works. It's not. Is there an aspect of being peaceful in Islam? For sure. That's great that you're talking about it. But when somebody asks you what is Islam and all you tell them is peace, what type of connotation do you think that's going to give them? What kind of idea do you think that's going to give the non-Muslim or even your fellow Muslim, even the kids when they're taught? And you just say that Islam means peace. That's your dictionary Hans Ware definition that you look up, in day one, that is aslama yuslimu islaman fahuwa muslimun. Yes, it means peace. Yes, it means to submit. But that's not what they're asking. Islam is much more than just jihad. And our entire Islamic infrastructure is not based off of a Hans Ware definition of what Islam is. That's not how we live our life. That's not how we practice our faith. And we all love stories. So let me tell you a story. That one day, the Sahaba, they said that we were sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, and a man just kind of came out of nowhere. He came out of nowhere and, mashallah, he was wearing full white clothing. Absolute whiteness in his clothing. His hair was pitch black. And it just seemed like he came out of nowhere. Nobody looks like that. And if somebody does look like that, they usually know who that person is. Sahaba asked, who is this person? Who's that person? don't know who that person is. He didn't have any signs of travel. I mean, it's Arabia. I mean, it's dust and dirt everywhere. He didn't have any of that on him. He came and he asked the Prophet ﷺ, you look at different narrations of the hadith, can I come closer? Can I come closer? Can I come closer? He kept on coming closer, going stepping over, coming closer to the Prophet ﷺ, coming closer to the Prophet ﷺ, until he was sitting knee to knee with the Prophet ﷺ. His knees were right in front of the knees of the Prophet ﷺ. And he placed his hands on the Prophet ﷺ's leg. And he asked him this exact question. He didn't say, Ya Rasulullah. He said, Ya Muhammad, oh Muhammad. Ya Muhammad. Mal Islam. This very question that we struggle to answer at interfaith gatherings. This very question that we struggle to answer and that this very question that we're not equipped sometimes to answer when we're asked this very question at work, in the corporate realm, at the gym, wherever you may be. What is Islam? Mal Islam. So the Prophet ﷺ, he answered that Islam is that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is this, saying this statement, saying it on your tongue, that Islam is that there is no God but Allah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His messenger. That's number one. And then he said Islam is to perform your salah. Islam is to pay the alms tax once a year. Islam is to fast in the month of Ramadan. Islam is to make the big Hajj if you are able to do so. And once he answered that question, the questioner said, you're right. That's correct. Good job, right? That's sadaqt. What you said is correct. So the Sahaba were looking at each other. Who's this person telling the Prophet ﷺ that he's correct? Obviously he's correct. He's telling him he's correct, sadaqt. And he asked him a few other questions, but I don't want to get to those other questions today, maybe inshallah later. And you might have heard this hadith. And this is a famous hadith known as Ḥadīth Jibrīl. Now when we think of the word hadith, the first thing that usually comes to mind is that hadith refers to the actions and the statements and the tacit approvals of the Prophet ﷺ, which is, yes, that's correct. But this is called Ḥadīth Jibrīl. It's not referring to the Prophet ﷺ's statement or action or tacit approval. It's referring to Jibril's statement. And this narration, which is narrated by Umar radiallahu anhu, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and a few other Sahaba, they say that it was near the end of the Prophet ﷺ's life in Medina when this narration took place. How do we know? Because it mentions Hajj. So we understand that. So when we're asked the question of what is Islam, don't think of yourself as too simple-minded to give the answer that it's the 5 pillars, because that's exactly what it is. That's what Islam is. You mentioned the foundations, you mentioned the pillars first. Everything else, politics, finance, education, all of that falls under these 5 pillars. But you got to start with the 5 pillars first. Without the foundation, you're mentioning all these other, fluff that it's not connecting with them, and you're giving a misconception of what Islam actually is. And as Muslims, we believe that wahi, a divine revelation, can only be given to a nabi and no one else. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses angels as agents to communicate this wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the prophets. And this is a very important point, because based off this hadith, we see what's going on. The Sahaba are around the Prophet ﷺ, and they didn't know who that person was that came, but they did witness Jibril alayhi salam in the form of a human being, but they did witness Jibril alayhi salam. So, as we just mentioned, that only the Anbiya are privy to obtaining wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what about this incident? So we understand with this incident is the Prophet ﷺ coached them up, coached the Sahaba up, coached their psyche up, coached their spirituality up to the point that they can handle Jibril alayhi salam in the form of a human being, So we understand, there's so many things that we can talk about from this hadith, and I don't want to digress too much, but how Jibril alayhi salam sought, how he sat down, how he asked the questions. Many things that we can learn from this hadith. But what we do understand is doing tabligh and conveying wahi is the primary function of prophets and not of the non-prophets. In order for a non-prophet to qualify for this function of doing tabligh and conveying the message of Islam, they would have to be prepped, at least potentially to receive this wahi. And that's what the Prophet ﷺ's messenger, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's messenger, the Prophet ﷺ did with the Sahaba. He prepped them. They weren't just some average Joes off the street, some random people. Prophet ﷺ was chosen to be a prophet. The Sahaba were chosen to be the Sahaba. So we understand that wahi, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty, and it's sent down through angel Jibril alayhi salam that was given to all of the prophets. And it's through that coaching of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the Sahaba achieved this rank. And we know from our history that it wasn't physically possible for the Prophet ﷺ to go and travel to every single tribe and every single area. So what would he do? He would send off the Sahaba. He prepped them, they're ready to go, he would send them off, and they would be the madrasa of that region. They would be the teachers, they would be the faculty, they would be the admin, they would be everything. That's the amount of trust that the Prophet ﷺ had for the Sahaba. And this is what suhbah, this is what companionship does. And we get a glimpse of that in the month of Ramadan. We do. What suhbah, what companionship does. And we saw that in those 1 or 2 years where we didn't get that suhbah of our friends and family and fellow musallis and the masjid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to pay attention. That could be taken away from you at any moment. Any time it can be taken away from you. I just met, a brother recently who, mashallah, walking, talking, everything, and boom, in one day, heart attack, and he's just full, on his bed. Can't even move. Can't even pick up his feet anymore. So when we pay heed, when we take, we look at these examples and we understand, what's the benefit? What's the hikmah? Why are these things happening around me? So when Jibril alayhi salam, he asks the question, what is Islam? Jibril is asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to define Islam for the companions that are around him. And the reason is that so the Sahaba do not include or exclude any part of that definition. You know what the definition is. Definitions are supposed to be jami' mani'. They are very comprehensive. They include everything and they exclude what they need to exclude. This is the religious definition, not a moral definition. Oh, Islam means peace. We all hold hands and we just do dua and we sing kumbaya. It's not what Islam is. You gotta understand what Islam is. That's what Islam is. Buniya al-Islamu ala khams. When the Prophet ﷺ said that Islam is built on these 5 pillars. That's what Islam is. It's like that tent with those 5 pillars. And as I mentioned before, everything else falls underneath that tent. Your education, your finances, politics, whatever the case may be. So this is what Islam is. This is what being Muslim is. And we understand that when we have that connection with the masjid, we understand that when we have that connection with scholarship, when we have that suhbah of scholars, and we sit down like how Jibril alayhi salam sat down and he taught us how to sit down and learn the deen. This is Jibril alayhi salam at the end of the day. None of us can think that we're better than him. Right? He's the one that possesses power, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about. So take home point is this, that perform the pillars your entire life. When you perform these pillars of Islam, then your entire life will fall into place. And performing these exoteric actions of Islam will have an impact on your esoteric life as well. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be raised with the shuhada and salihin. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala